do come join us.
Amazing scene. Showroom of them, really, really big.
Lady pole dance, I think, with these cables going through. But to introduce up, we have Emma Calder, Vivien Halas, Ruth Ducker, and Gemma Burditt. So, thank you all for coming. I should say who I am if you've forgotten. My name is Jez Stewart. I work at the BFI, curator there, and I have a great privilege to looking after the animation collection. So I've worked with Emma and Vivien quite a lot over the years. Where I want to start is just a question for you, Ruth and Gemma first, and sort of going into how familiar were you with Joy's work before this evening, or being invited to this, and what were your impressions from what you saw?
I'd seen Animal Farm before, but I hadn't heard or seen it on. Is that working? Yeah. Yeah, so I've seen Animal Farm before, but I'd never seen any of the other ones, and I was just, I didn't really know what to expect, and I just thought they were completely amazing and so visually inventive, and things that I definitely want to revisit when I leave here, and I wasn't expecting that.
I've seen all of those ones before. I'm not sure why. I think that they are just, that they seem to be part of the visual language that I've been fortunate enough to see. But seeing them again is amazing, because I'm reminded of how brilliant they are, really, how brilliant she was, her humour, her creativity. It is good to be reminded.
And Emma, so Vivien indicated that you had some experience of working with Halas and Batchelor. Did you meet Joy, and were you aware of her and her reputation?
I think that I saw her at the London Film Festival, which she died in '91, didn't she? And I think that I saw her in probably about '81. Upstairs, there used to be a thing where the animators used to go. This is a bit dodgy. Hang on. There? Does that sound good? So I think I saw her, but she was a legend. But I never spoke to her. But I did talk to John a few times, and John was very, very, very friendly. I think the first time I went into his office, he sort of kissed my hand and stuff like that. So he was a very charming gentleman that Joy I sadly never spoke to.
I've done this joke before, but Vivien, when did you first meet Joy? Or better phrase, when did you first start to realise that there was something a little bit different around your mum, and that other people were aware of who she was?
I would have been probably about 2, and she was working on the Charlie films, and she used to have a little, like a coffee table, but it was covered in plasticine, and she was doing all the topography of how it would work out in little model figures, and I remember getting a knitting needle and going like that, because I thought she was playing with me, but actually not.
So you phrased it quite nicely in the introduction, Vivien, in terms of talking about Joy being bitten by the bug of animation, and I expect you all have quite different routes into that. So maybe if you just a little bit of how you sort of came to working with animation. So I know, Emma, if we start with you, like I said, you actually studied graphic design first, is that right? When did you start to make your things move, and what was it graphic?
Well, I started doing animation when I was at the Royal College, and I think it was about 6 months into the graphic design course there, and Bob Goffrey, who was a famous animator, and Dick Taylor came to run a small workshop, and basically it was open to graphic design and illustration students. But I'd already been planning to go and do some animation anyway, because I had a friend at the film school who told me they had a very good Rostrum camera, and I must go over to the film school and try it out. So that was the beginning, but I'd got a bit disillusioned with graphic design, and I was already well on the way to want to do something with stories and storytelling and sort of communicating kind of ideas on a much sort of wider scale than just graphic design. So I was sort of ready when that workshop started.
Ruth, you studied fine art, is that right? Yeah, so how did you make the leap?
So I'd been working as a fine artist for about 10 or so years, and I'd had some success, but obviously not a massive amount, and it wasn't, I have 2 school children as well. As a single parent, it wasn't really bringing in enough money to support the family. My brother, who was working as an animator, suggested that I try animation, and so I went to Central St Martin's to do the LAS course, that many people may have heard of, and I haven't really looked back since. It seemed to be very easy, an easy transition from fine art, where you're making a story in a frame and taking those skills that I'd learned and transferring them into a moving image and moving stories was actually quite straightforward. And also the whole animation world is so creative, and people are so friendly and embracing it. It seemed very natural and easy progression that I made in this world, and managed to earn a living as well, which is great. Thanks.
And Gemma, you came from an illustration background, is that right?
I actually started off as a puppeteer, so I studied puppetry, and then I worked in small theatre companies and did bits of animation as part of some of the shows that we did, and then I really liked animation. And I did my MA at the National Film and Television School. And I just remember when I first started, just because I hadn't done animation before, they asked me just to animate a pair of scissors going across the screen, just being like, wow, this is totally magic. And it was so lovely to see some of these films earlier on today, and looking at how they built things in camera before, the invention of After Effects. And I think the more and more that I've worked in animation, the less I do things in camera. And it was amazing to see that and trying to work out how it was done. And there's definitely something magical about, especially stop frame animation, when you're kind of moving objects and then you watch it back on the screen and it comes to life.
And I suppose with Vivien, you managed to avoid being bitten by the bug. Was it some kind of careful smoke bomb that you set off just in case to keep the bugs away?
No, I landed up as a graphic designer because I did do animation at art school, but the 2 guys teaching it were so scared of me because of my parents, and they actually knew nothing, and they thought I knew more than them, which I didn't. But they weren't very kind, so I hid in graphics.
Okay, so we'll talk, obviously, International Women's Day. We're going to talk about relations to the women in relation to animation. And there's different ways that we can look at this in terms of, and I think some of that sort of come up in the films that we've shown already, in terms of representation of female characters in animation. Sort of the opportunities for women in the industry back in the 1940s when Joy started, or the 30s when Joy started, 40, up to today. And then I'd like to sort of go on to talk a little bit more about whether there's something about animation and the control that you can have over sort of time and space and the screen in there that really makes it a more direct means of expression for all kinds of sort of marginalised voices. But maybe just starting it a little bit with representing a number of different spheres in here in terms of sort of arts, independent animation, and you've worked in the commercial sector as well, Emma. How have you found the different parts of the industry have a different opportunities for women, and how much do you think it's changed even in your career?
I'm not sure this has changed, except that I'm getting older, so I suppose that's something that has noticeably changed, and I think that it actually gets quite a lot harder when you get older and you're a woman. I can't quite put my finger on it, and you two are not quite as old as me yet, but I feel like like when you're a young, very attractive woman walking into lots of male-dominated environments, you know, you kind of got on fairly well. But as an older woman, often I've been in a situation where I've pitched work or presented ideas, and you're confronted with a room full of 30-something white males who look sneeringly at you like you're some kind of complete sort of eccentric freak. So that's kind of annoying, really. But I think, you know, you've always got to just go with the swing of things. You know, I used to get fantastic deals because I was a woman, and I could get round anyone to give me, you know, a cheaper deal in the labs than probably any bloke could. So you have to take, you know, what you can when you can get it, and then just, you know, sort of not really. I mean, I don't suppose I really thought about it that much, but it was often, you know, walking into the labs with a whole crew of people on a pop video where I was directing the animation, and everyone would assume you were the producer, things like that. And I think that still probably happens quite often.
Yeah, I went to something at a Management Animation Festival last year, and there was a session from Animated Women UK, and they were talking about a similar thing in terms of there's an assumption that as a woman director, you're treated as the kind of producer. It's just assumed that you're being there. Is that something you've experienced particularly in children's animation?
Absolutely, and if you noticed on one of the shows there was a lot of live action as well as animation, and actually that environment is even worse than animation. Actually the balance of men and women within the animation industry is far better than in live action, and I would go on set and find myself being told by everybody how I wanted to do my job, and also either ignored, as if, or accused of being the producer, or just told how to do it. And I think I don't mind. I find it okay. I think I just have very thick skin. I didn't really care. I'd wait for everyone to finish, and then I'd say, okay, well, let's do it like this. And so I never got angry. I would never shout. I would never raise my voice. So I just would wait for everybody to have their say and then demand mine, which was my right as the director. But again, I've seen other women on set in senior creative roles who have been found themselves bullied by that environment, and it is difficult. You do have to be quite resilient in many ways. And I agree with you, Emma, as you get older you become increasingly invisible, and that is a problem. But then again, I suppose you have to just stick your course and not be overwhelmed by everybody else's opinion. You have to think, all right, I want to do this, and I'm driven to do this, and I can do it, so therefore I am going to do it. And it is difficult, but it's not impossible.
And Gemma, your work is kind of sort of, you worked, the trailer you showed an example of a kind of graphic novel. You've also worked in an installation environment.
Yeah.
Do you find that there is kind of more opportunities in that sort of the art sector, more generally? I suppose it's in terms of animation, but also in terms of a woman animation.
I think when I left college, I did work a bit in the kind of commercial sector and a little bit on music videos, and I found it incredibly intimidating. I don't know whether it was a question of being a woman or not being the most assertive person in the world, but I was on shoots with all male environments, and I just felt that there was always an argument about who was going to get their way, and there'd be like 20 blokes saying what they thought, and I'd say what I thought, and I always felt kind of squashed in that environment. But again, I'm not sure if that's the thing about being a woman or just particularly my personality, and I did find that working in a more kind of fine art, or I do quite a lot of collaborations with kind of science projects or academic projects, that I was more of an individual, and people did take on board what I was saying more than having to fight in big teams in very pressurised situations. So I think that suited me a lot better. But then I think the problem that you face as you get older and you kind of have a family and you have to take time out as a freelancer, it's not so easy to get back into it because you don't get kind of maternity leave in the same way, and the payment, you're just getting paid when you're working, and that has been more of an issue than you might get in a more kind of conventional job.
And Vivien, so we've talked about this sort of number of events like this in terms of joy as whether joy is a feminist, whether joy, particularly in terms of Halas and Batchelor, there were unprecedented opportunities for women, particularly in the 1940s, and part of that was because of the war, and like many industries, the animation industry drew on women in a way that they hadn't before. There were opportunities to do that, but it did continue into the post-war period, and in the late 1940s, the animation in Halas and Batchelor was almost all women. That did change before Animal Farm for a number of reasons. But so maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you thought the opportunities that Joy gave to women in the studio, and whether how she found her sort of place in the animation industry.
Well, she always encouraged other women, like Alison de Vere, for instance, and I think she wasn't exactly a feminist as such. When she was young, with lots of energy, it never occurred to her that there was any difference between men and women. And I think it's something that really resonates, because in graphic design that happens as well. I remember I worked in Paris, and at one point when I just had my daughter, single mother with a small child, and in the end I left, and the guy said to me, well, finally, you were too old for me anyway. I mean, you could have him arrested today, but that was some time ago, I have to say. But my mother, she was quite clever, like you. She kept quiet and waited for everyone to put their word in, and she, in particular, would leave it until she would pop their bubble, because she was very intelligent and very witty, and she would get in there. And I think that's why quite a few people were frightened of her. But if you got to know her, she really did support women. There was someone called Marie Cornwell who always said that Mum championed her when at festivals men were saying she was just nothing and must have sex problems because her film was like this and like that. Mum championed her.
So there's definitely something in terms of the opportunities that were there in the 1940s through the war, and there probably doesn't get an opportunity like that again, with the exceptions, until I suppose the art school movements and the art schools started to sort of have animation courses. You get people like Talma Goldman and Antoinette Starkovitz and other breaking through, and then so you started at the RCA before there was an animation course, didn't you? There was others, Sue Young and others were there at the time. And then there was this unprecedented moment for British animation when Channel 4, as a sort of a broadcasting company with money for advertising and a remit, a publicly stated remit that they had to support other printed arts forms, and you had a commissioner for animation, Claire Kitson. It was a very progressive time for opportunities for women in animation in that time. Is that something you felt part of a movement at that time with Joanna Quinn and the others?
Well, I mean, obviously we were sort of shaping, obviously following on, when you see Joy, because obviously when you're in the moment, you always think it's you that have done it all, but of course we weren't, because we were following on from people like Joy Batchelor, Alison de Vere, and obviously Thelma, and there were lots of very fantastic female animators in America as well. Susan Pearton, what's her name, who used to be in my studio, what's her name? Caroline Leaf. I don't know if all the audience know all these people, but you'll have to write it down and look it up, all these different fantastic animators. And the trouble is, you also take things for granted too, because it was a fantastic time, and there was a lot of work around gender there was just a lot of work. There was a lot of commercial work, pop videos. I was working all day long doing freelance work in an animation studio. I would work all night doing illustrations for magazines, and go back to my studio and do those. I think that we'd heard that it was Erica Russell told me, she tipped me off. She said, "I'm going to get some money from Channel 4. You should try and get some money from Channel 4 too." And actually it was Paul Madden who preceded Claire Kitson, who came round to our studio with Lee Stork, who was also producing Erica. And Lee Stork was a guy who'd been working for Wyatt Catania. Wyatt Catania were an animation studio, and he was their producer. And he'd retired, and he was just looking for something to do in his retirement. And basically, we got the money for Jed's film, and Lee produced it, and Paul Madden was very, very supportive. And then halfway through the project, Claire Kitson took over. Actually, she didn't like the film, but anyway, that's beside the point. But she didn't commission it. Paul Madden commissioned it, and then, of course, we had all those other Channel 4 films that I got commissioned from the BBC, also lottery money. No, it was fantastic because we were getting money to do, interesting, creative pieces of work, and we had enough money to pay, a small number of people to help us and work on those films, and that's what it should be. Should still be like. There should still be that cultural remit to challenging, interesting work that gives the audience joy. But unfortunately, we have very little of that, except for your joy.
Good plan, thank you. So this year, the 3 BAFTA animated shorts, 2 of them were funded from overseas, the British animated shorts. How much do you essentially have? There is a sort of envy of looking overseas for funding opportunities, but I'm wondering whether do you think Britain has a better representation and opportunities for women in the industries than those perhaps? France has this amazing animation culture in terms of funding, Canada has it. Does that extra funding need more funding for women, or? I don't know, Ruth, if you ever worked on any overseas co-productions or anything I haven't experienced. I mean, how can we benchmark Britain against other countries in terms of opportunity?
Yes and no. It's a difficult one because obviously working in kids TV, that it's broadcast, you have a budget and you work to that. You are quite limited, arguably limited creatively. You have to adhere to certain rules within the stories and in what you're allowed to broadcast for children of that age. So it's difficult to say in terms of funding because it's a different beast than making creative work. But in answer to funding from overseas, yes. A lot of the most of the productions I've worked on have been funded by European or multiple territories or multiple countries. Then you can't make them. You can't afford to make the programs without having funding from different sources. There just aren't enough people who will watch television in this country, so you have to sell it to other countries, and there are arrangements that mean that you'll make co-productions with Canada or with Ireland or with France, and that's good. That means that you are collaborating with. You're forced to collaborate with other people as well, and I think that is the best thing. Some of the productions I've worked on have been for American broadcasters, and they're slightly different in that they have more money, and they make shows here in the UK because it's cheaper, because we have a really good skill set. We have so many talented artists. We also can draw from animators and artists from Europe, so there is a lot of work that's made here, both animation and film and television, that is for an American audience, that just because of those things, because the skill set and because the economics of making it. So What was the question?
I'm just wondering in terms of whether you find that the balance of opportunities for women differs in other countries.
And so, in terms of women, again, it's difficult to say. Preschool has a large percentage of, has much a bigger percentage of women workers because we do take less money for similar roles, and so therefore quite often you'll have people working on a kids show because it's poorly paid, and a man might turn it down, so you're not paying me enough, whereas a woman will go, well, okay, yeah, I'm happy, I'll do that. So I think that, again, it's a slightly distorted view of balance. There are a lot more women in preschool television for various reasons, and long may it be so.
If anybody else has got anything to say on that one, otherwise, it just go back to this idea of animation itself as a kind of a means of expression for it's a great tool for voicing all kinds of different issues, particularly for marginalised voices. I wonder if you've got anything to say about sort of art animation as a medium for change to a certain extent.
I think it was really interesting hearing Emma reel off some of the female animators from that kind of period where Channel 4 was investing a lot, because I think they were people who really inspired me when I was a student, and I was just thinking about Ruth Lingford as well, and her work. And I think what they were doing during that period was really making women's voices heard, and I know that one of my teachers, Mariette Rimmerman as well, she did a lot of stuff about domestic abuse in animation, and made animation like a serious medium and not something that was for children, but telling different, very individual stories. And I think that was the first time I'd ever seen that.
Staying, it was called.
Exactly, yeah.
I remember did something with Candy Calder last year, and she was talking about having she was started in live action and finding it in animation, because she was doing it all herself. She had the confidence to do more. She could almost she didn't have to explain to somebody else what she was doing or be embarrassed what she was doing, because she could kind of put it all out there. And Ruth's films are a very good example in terms of she made those early films herself on a home computer, the Amiga, and being able to just have this kind of direct opportunity. And there is something that I think about that, being able to, I don't know if you have anything to say on this, so, in terms of having the control of everything that's been going on the screen, animation being the perfect opportunity to voice things that perhaps you wouldn't if you had to explain them to a live action crew.
Yeah, I suppose I think of something that Bob Goffrey said in his book, that, you know, the book with that he brought out at the same time as the TV show that he did, Do-It-Yourself animation, and it's that idea that with animation you can go anywhere, and it's like you don't have to, you know, hire an aeroplane or whatever you need to do and go to Spain or Africa or wherever you decide to make the film. You can just, you know, draw the place, make a model, and suddenly you're in that place. I mean, I think I'd be happy to direct a crew, actually, but I've just never been in that, not very often. I've been in that position a couple of times when I've been directing animation to go with live action, and the live action director's been so useless that they haven't been able to work out how to direct the crew to fit with our animation, so I've had to take over directing the live action. But, you know, I would be happy to do that. It just, you know, my career just hasn't gone that way. And I actually really love collaborating. You know, Julian's one of my collaborators, and he's in the room. Unfortunately, I don't get enough money anymore to have the teams that I want around me. So I'm sort of forced into the situation of making films more or less on my own. Hopefully it's going to change because I'm currently writing 3 feature films, which will probably end up being a series. And I'm doing that, with, a producer. Julian's also helping. And, at the moment we haven't got money, we haven't looked for money yet. But, I am working in a small team, so it's not just me. And I think although there's this, it's a bit of a myth, really. I mean, I think there are people like Candy Guard who prefer to be completely in control. But, often it's not what you choose, it's what is available, and being resourceful. So that's really what, so if you can do, if you don't have to do it all yourself, it's probably better. But often one has to, so you just make the best of it.
And you're talking about features, we're going to have to wrap up in a second, but just I think it's an important moment to remark that that it is extraordinary. Britain didn't have an animated feature film until Animal Farm in 1954, and it was co-directed by a woman. And Britain's second animated feature film, Ruddigore from 1967, solely directed by a woman. Unless I'm wrong, there hasn't been another one. There's only one other example, which is Arthur Christmas, directed by Sarah Smith, and those are our 3 animated features directed by women. So there's more to do.
And Lottie Renegas.
In Germany. So I'm talking about British.
Oh, but didn't she make it here though?
Prince Ahmed, no, it's in Germany.
Oh, okay.
Are there any questions? You've got one right at the back, yeah.
I saw Animal Farm when I was 8 years old, and it made such a big impression on me. I'd really like to know, what first animation or early animation films made an impression on you, and what you was getting out of it.
Particular animation film that made a real impact on you and you're young?
The Jungle Book. I was taken at the age of 3 by my dad, and actually I know I can still sing every single song by heart. But apparently, allegedly, I'm told that I piped up in a quiet moment. I'm too young to see this film. But I still love it, and I still watch it, and I still sing the songs.
I went to Encounters Film Festival when I was about 19 in Bristol, and I saw one of Ruth Lingford's films. And it was the first time I'd seen kind of animation for adults, and I just thought it was the most amazing thing that I'd ever seen. It was what made me want to be animated.
It has to be Bambi. I saw it when I was very little, and I cried, and then I wouldn't leave the theatre, and they had to prize me off the chair.
Well, I was always a great Noggin the Nog fan. And also the Clangers. And I really liked, although people don't really get to see it anymore, but one of my real favourites was Crystal Tips and Alistair, which was fantastic. And, that's why I was so pleased when Dick Taylor came to the Royal College, because he was just, he's a really sort of forgotten hero of animation. But then I suppose, a bit later, seeing Alison de Vere's Cafe Bar and, Caroline Leases the Street, they were 2 films that were, stood out, I think, around that time.
I'm glad we've got some if you haven't seen it, so Alison de Vere is definitely a name who's worked to look out for. Ruth Lingford, we've mentioned a lot of good names, so I think that's a good one. I think we have to wrap up now, and there's going to be a short interval, so if you do have a burning question for one of our panellists, then I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'd like to really thank you for your attention and your time, and a huge thank you to our guests, so Gemma, Ruth, Vivien, Emma. Thank you.
You also have forms, you should have been given 4 perhaps, when you came in, which are to help us with getting more funding in future. We need to give them back to the BFI. So if you could please, either now or when you leave after Animal Farm, if you could hand them back to one of our volunteers, we'd be really, really grateful. But thank you again, and also, John is in the bar for a few more minutes with Sisters of Reggae as well. Thank you.